Olá, meus amigos. Bem-vindos a mais uma edição do Espaço Mwangolé na 𝗀𝗿𝗀𝗀 TV. Vamos continuar a refletir sobre o Black History Month. Nosso convidado da semana é Rodney Diverlus, autor, ativista e cofundador do Black Lives Matter Canadá. E você é o meu convidado número 1, porque tudo de bom mora aqui no Espaço Mwangolé e na 𝗀𝗿𝗀𝗀 TV. Vamos à nossa conversa da semana.
Hello, my name is Rodney Diverlus. I am an artist and an activist and based out of Toronto, and I'm the co-founder of Black Lives Matter in Canada. Happy to be here, Francisco. To me, being Black in Canada is complex. It's very complicated. Many of us, actually, this is not the first country in many ways that we migrated to. This is the second or the third. Many of us are from elsewhere. Blackness in Canada is very different from person to person. There is no monolith. There is no single story for Blackness in Canada. And so what happens ultimately is that our community gets to be as diverse and rich as possible. There are Black Christians, there are Black Muslims, there are Black atheists, there are Black folks from the continent of Africa, Black people from the Caribbean, Black people who have been here in the Americas. There are Black people who speak a variety of different languages, ancestral languages, but also colonial languages like English, Portuguese, French, Spanish. Blackness is so complicated in Canada. It's so complex, it's so rich, it's so nuanced. We still do, because the reality of the situation is that most people, if I go down the street, don't actually know the Black history in Canada. Maybe understand how it happened in the States. I think a lot of people understand maybe the civil rights movement in the States. Maybe they know about the Emancipation Proclamation in the US, but very few people actually understand the history and the lineage of Black migration and Black movement in Canada. Most people don't actually even know that there were over 100 years of slavery in Canada, and that the Underground Railroad actually works both ways. Most people don't know about the history of racist immigration policies. Most people don't know about the history of settlements in Canada, both on the East Coast and maritime provinces in Ontario and on the West Coast. And so there's still an incredible amount of work that needs to be done. And we are all collectively at an elementary level when we need to be quickly brought up to an expert level to understanding Black migration and Black patterning in Canada. Having said that, I think that Black history is important, not only is to look at history, but to be thinking and looking at the future as well. We are Black Lives Matter joins in with other folks that are calling for this month to not only be about looking at Black history, but to be thinking about Black futures and how do we learn from our past as a way of building towards a collective future. I believe that Black history and Black future should be every day of the year, all 365 days, and we're not bound to 1 month. But while we're here, we might as well take the time to learn about our ancestors and the future that we want to build. Absolutely. I think it's important to celebrate Black history beyond February because Black people are here beyond February, and our contributions to this society extend beyond the shortest month of the year. Practically, also, I have to say, this is a joke, but most Black people that I know hate winter. And so while we might be celebrated in February, we are celebrating ourselves all year round, especially the sunny months. So I actually think that, for many people, we seem to think that these 29 days are the only days we can talk about Black history, the only days we can talk about Black action and Black activism. But really, this is meant to be a reminder that, for me, it's a reminder that Black history should be celebrated every day and all days.
The key majors.
Yeah, that's a very good question. My most inspiring moment didn't actually happen during the Black History Month. Like I said, because I choose to celebrate Black history and Black lineage. every day and all days. Definitely in 2016, the 2016 BLM Pride action was probably one of the most inspiring moments of my life. It was really a defiant moment in which the queer and trans Black community stood up and said enough is enough, and in front of the world, in front of a million eyes, was willing to stop one of North America's largest pride parades to talk about Black lives and the importance of protecting Black lives. And so that to me happened in June, 5 years ago this year. And it really was a moment of inspiration for me. It inspired me to really recognize the power of Black organizing, but also the power of collectively working together as a community to get things done for ourselves and for each other. It's absent. The Canadian education system failed. I will give it a failing grade for it failing its students and prepping its students to actually understand the history of Blackness in Canada. We have to recognize that it starts from there. We spend so long learning about Sojourner Truth or Harriet Tubman or Martin Luther King Jr. or like really prolific African American names, but we actually don't talk about the freedom fighters that brought folks here in Canada and vice versa. We don't talk about the anti-Black history of the formation of Canada. People don't even know that there were enslaved Africans here in this country before it was a country. Even when we talk about colonization and decolonization, the conversation is empty because it actually doesn't take into consideration that the decolonial project involved addressing anti-Black racism and the historical movements of Black people within Canada. We have failed young Canadians and our education system by omitting the truth, by omitting the reality of what happened. And what's happened, and what the conclusion of it is, we're seeing full-grown adults be our political leaders, act a fool, not actually know the history that they're referencing. And people in their 40s and their 50s who are leading our country are catching up from a lack of education that was done when they were younger. We are failing successive generations by not actually teaching the right kind of history. And I'm hoping that after this reckoning, after this moment, there can be some major transformation to our education curriculum at all levels to actually teach folks about the very histories of the people that live here. I don't think everyone here actually understands how Black people got to this country, and that there is actually many of us that speak a variety, dozens and dozens and dozens of colonial and ancestral languages, that we come from a variety of different religions, variety of different sort of ethnic enclaves, that our histories are so complex and so rich. None of that are taught in schools, and that's a shame. Black Futures Month 2021 was actually such an incredible opportunity to have community-wide discussions on where do we move forward next. So this is about 8 months after the historic resurgence of Black Lives Matter protests last summer. And so when the dust starts to settle and when activity starts to go down, this is actually such a perfect opportunity for us to reflect on what's been learned and make plans and gear up for a sort of a fight ahead. For on our end of Black Lives Matter Canada, we saw this as an opportunity to address the dire needs that our communities are facing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so for us, that meant launching a Canada-wide Black Mutual Aid Fund in which we would provide micro grants to eligible families and individuals from across the country that need support to pay their bills, to pay childcare costs, to put food on the table, and to keep folks healthy. And so that was our response for Black Futures Month. But what was really amazing about this year is that so many different community groups and organizations have taken it upon themselves to engage in the conversation of how do we best support each other moving forward. This is actually such a time for action. We have learned so many lessons from last year, and there's only one way forward, and it's to keep moving, it's to keep pushing, it's to keep agitating. And I'm really excited about the momentum that this month provided us all to keep going for the rest of the year and beyond. Very simply, I can give a very complicated answer, but I like to actually answer what is Black Lives Matter Canada and why, but don't all lives matter very simply. Very simply, Black Lives Matter Canada is a platform to build Black power in Canada. It's a platform for Black folks, an umbrella for all Black folks to feel and to have advocacy, support, and services. It's been 6 years since I've been doing this work, and since the beginning since the very first day of our work, the question of, but don't all lives matter, gets always asked. And really, the answer for me to that is, actually, every life, every breath matters, every life matters. But currently, we are living in societies in which Black lives are not treated as such, in which Black lives are not afforded dignity, grace, compassion, in which Black lives in many ways are not afforded life, are not afforded resources, are not afforded opportunity, are not afforded space. And we do this work in many ways to address that disparity and to let everyone know that Black lives do matter. Black lives do matter as well. Black lives do matter and then some. Black lives do matter like everyone else. Black lives do matter, so do you. Black lives do matter, et cetera, et cetera. Saying Black Lives Matter doesn't negate anyone else's humanity. What it does is it puts us central to the conversation, our issues central to the conversation, and it lets the community know in many ways, hey, there's some problems here that we need to address. Yeah, I mean, this is a question that we also receive as well. Why Black Lives Matter protests don't address Black on Black crime. First and foremost, Black on Black crime is a misnomer, is a falsehood, and it's actually an anti-Black racist term that is used to describe a phenomenon that actually happens across all communities. I always ask, where are folks addressing white on white crime? Where are folks addressing European on European crime? The reality of how we define crime, most of the time, passion and violence happens to people who live close to each other. There's a myth that we believe that crime, quote unquote crime, happens to strangers. They tend to happen with the people closest to you. They tend to happen with people that you are living with. They tend to happen with people that are in your families, that are in your communities, that are in your churches, that are in your workplaces. That tends to be how it is. So if you're actually looking at demographic communities, African communities versus Asiatic communities versus European communities, across the board, the percentages of white on white crime, Asian on Asian crime, Black on Black crime, however you want to call it, South American on South American crime, actually is consistent across the board. And so why is it that we single out and we only have a term for one community? Why is it that it's Black on Black that's being referenced, but we're not actually fully referencing the reality of how criminality happens in our communities? To me, that's anti-Blackness. To me, that's anti-Black racism. I think we also have to recognize that some of the things that we consider as crimes in our communities are actually as a result of our failure as a society to provide supports for people. Take, for example, Black children at the Toronto TDSB. Black children are 3 times more likely to face expulsion, more likely to actually literally be kicked out of school and to be fed into a school to prison pipeline. Those children then grow up and are more likely to face poverty, are more likely to not have access to resources and services, are more likely to literally be forgotten by the very society that raised them. How do we expect that person to go and to move forward in a way that uplifts and empowers us all? How do we expect that individual to have the resources and the access when they don't have access to work, when they don't have upward mobility, and when they're in many ways lacking support? And so I actually think that we need to address the dearth of societal support for our young people in our communities. I'd rather think about how to generate community supports for people to lift them out of poverty, to lift them out of their circumstances, and to give them opportunities. Often, the things that we consider petty crimes come out of a lack of opportunity and a lack of access. That's on us. That's on us as a society. It's not on the individual person. It's on all of us collectively. And I think that we actually have to look at ourselves. And if somebody asks me that question, I'll bounce that question right back to them. What are you doing to address community crime? What are you doing to address community violence all across the board? There are no saviors for all of us. There's no one person that has to do everything. It's actually our collective responsibility to address violence at all levels. And we have to be honest with ourselves that violence happens at all levels. It happens interpersonally. There's state violence, there's institutional violence, et cetera, et cetera. Absolutely. I mean, like, your question is spot on in that, you know, talking about racism, particularly in Canada, can raise up a lot of emotion. It's just something we are not trained to do. We don't have, as a society, the language to actually be able to have fruitful debate and discussion about how do we address racism. So much of this work is actually equipping people with the tools and the language to even come to the table, to feel like they can have that conversation without getting defensive. For me, I think it's always important to remove the individual. When I talk about racism and when I talk about anti-Black racism, I'm often talking about systemic. I'm often talking about the institutional, because it's so much bigger than the individual one-on-one. If one person is acting in a way that we deem racist, it's often because they're tied to a broader system that they likely don't have control over. They don't even know they don't have control over. Racism is a poison. It's a societal poison that we all get impacted by. And that the least we address the poison, the more that it actually spreads and seeps and toxify our spaces. And so for me, it's such a broader conversation. It's so much bigger than one individual person. And so when I talk to people and they get defensive and they feel like they're being attacked, I always like to actually pull it outside of them. A, no one's that special. B, we actually are perpetuating the things that we have learned that have been brought down to us. And we all, in many ways, if you are living in 2020, you have inherited this problem, just like I am, just like you have. And so anybody that's living in this society right now, we collectively have inherited a problem that some of our ancestors created. And so we can either get defensive about it, or we can actually roll up our sleeves, get down and dirty, and figure out how we're going to solve this problem for our generations to come. We can't start a conversation when there's a barrier and a wall. We can't ever start a conversation when there's guilt and there's defensiveness. I think it's really important for people to remove themselves out of those emotions and those feelings and recognize that it's so much beyond us. I mean, it became very clear to us in the first couple of years of organizing with BLM that there was the lack of text and the lack of writing about the Black experience in Canada was embarrassing. There's a moment where you actually end up collecting all the books that exist that are written by Canadian authors recently that talk about the Black experience in Canada. You actually run out. There's a moment where you buy them all and there's no more. And so that was definitely the first reason, is because we believe that a lot of these stories and these narratives just were not being told and were not being translated whatsoever. Exactly. The second decision that we made to do this is because we wanted to let Black Canada write for themselves. And so we knew that it was very easy for any of us to write it, any of us by ourselves. But knowing how complex Blackness is in Canada, knowing how much complexity there is, like how much intersection there is, we actually really wanted to create this as a community book and to allow Black Canada to write themselves. That's why we invited a number of authors to write mini chapters that talked about everything from being Black and Muslim to being Black and queer and trans to being Black and incarcerated. What does that mean? We really wanted to create space for complexity, for you to be able to read it and recognize that the perspectives of living Black in Toronto and living while Black in Yukon were very different. The perspective of what it means to be living on the West Coast versus the East Coast, to be living in urban and rural areas, were very different. It was about complicated the narrative of Blackness and allowing a space for as many stories as possible to be put out. Lastly, the reason we wrote it is because we knew that if we didn't write our own narrative, it would be written for us. That's how it's happened historically, that in many ways, a lot of the journalists that have written about us are not Black. A lot of the people that have written journal articles about us were not Black. And that in many ways, it was up to us to write our own narrative, to write our own concrete, permanent words that describe this moment at a time. Oh, I have to say there is a specific chapter that I actually got really emotional the very first time I read it. It's Many 1,000 Gone. It's the chapter that was co-written by 𝗿𝗀𝗱𝗲𝗀 and 𝗿𝗏𝗏𝗏. And 𝗿𝗏𝗏𝗏 is incarcerated. He is an inmate serving a federal sentence in a federal facility on the East Coast. And 𝗿𝗀𝗱𝗲𝗏 is an academic, a radio host, and an abolitionist. And the conversation, Elle sort of takes notes from Randolph, from his cell, and she writes them, and they talk about their conversation. It really, it gutted me, I have to say. Like, I have never read something that talked about just that experience, just what this means when our young folks are pried and are plucked from their communities, how this impacts all the people that are being left behind, how this impacts him. Elle really doesn't skirt around the issues. And in her work, what I appreciated about it is that she really recognizes that, even in her prison abolition, that there are people who do bad things, but they still deserve dignity and justice, that they're not bad people, that there are other ways forward beyond putting them in a cage cell, that there are other ways of providing tangible supports for them. And really, it comes down to that. And that chapter specifically is, it was the most emotional to read, and to think about that this human being still doesn't have his freedom, still actually isn't able to atone for the things that he did, still is not able to heal and move forward. And in many ways, it talks about how broken our prison system is by talking about it from a first-hand experience. It's the reason why we put it as chapter 2. It's the chapter that comes right after our opening, just because of really how powerful it is to get that perspective. But really, I appreciate all the chapters in the book. That one's just the one that we don't really hear often. In our head, when we think about the prison system, it's that something bad happens in society. We're just going to lock that person up and we're going to push the problem over there. But we rarely think about the impact that it has on a community, the impact that it has on an individual, the impact that it has on all of us as a society, and the ways that we're actually not stepping up to actually create healing in those cases. We're just pushing the problem away. And to hear that from a personal perspective was really powerful. Live your love, trust your truth. This is actually, it's not mine. I should attribute it to a poetry duo called Climbing Poetry from upstate New York. I had a chance to see them live in 2011, a long time ago, 10 years ago. And they, one of her name, and she signed my poster and put "Live your love, trust your truth." And really that quote itself I've carried on since then. It really describes my practice. It describes my outlook in life. And it's sort of a guiding motto that I used. Live your love, trust your truth. Yeah, I think that it's just a really exciting time to be a Black person living in the Americas right now. I feel like in many ways, we're all finishing the project that our ancestors began. We're all coming full circle to our sort of ancestral awakenings. I think that there's a lot of energy out there. And what's exciting about this is I feel like in many ways, we're on the precipice of creating a really lasting systemic change and infrastructure in our city. We're building new programs. We're creating advocacy bodies. We're creating new campaigns. We're new services. There are so many different ways that we are creative solutions that Black communities and non-Black folks are proposing and are building right now. And I feel lucky and I feel thankful to be around to be able to witness them. It's really inspiring. And I'm just looking forward to what happens 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when we're reflecting back and thinking about just how much the seeds that we planted 6 years ago in 2014, how much those seeds have grown and generated and how much changed our society has been.
Until we are free.
Reflections on Black Lives Matter in Canada.
Thank you so much. Esta foi a conversa com Rodney Diverlus. Black History Month também é parte da história do Canadá. Vivências e emoções são discutidas aqui no Espaço Mwangolé, que é meu, é seu, é nosso e estamos na 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗀 TV. Estamos juntos.